Yes, yes, yes. Welcome to View from My Window. I don't think I need to explain this to you guys again, but I'm going to explain it one more time. View from my window is pretty much, it's a metaphor for me standing at my window, the things I went through growing up in South Philly, out Wilson. And I say views from my window because it's from my eyes. I'm telling you stories through my eyes, exactly the way I saw it. Each one of my homeboys probably have a different interpretation of it. But this edition of Views from My Window is pretty much, let's call this Bach in Southern High School. Let's call it the neighborhood rules. So, getting out of 8th grade, going into high school, going to 9th grade was, for me, and for probably most of us, was a big thing. Some people wanted to, leave the neighborhood or go to Dobbins. Some people wanted to go, to West, to Overbrook, things of that nature. And in South Philly at that time, it was, you had Southern and you had Orton Reed. Being from the Jets, being from Wilson, you wanted, it was either Orton Reed or Southern. But a friend of mine who I went to school with when I went to Thomas, went to Southern, he was 2 grades ahead of me. He didn't have a good time in Southern, always got into a lot of trouble. So Mom Dukes wanted me to go to Bach. Knife at Mifflin. Bach was like, back then, the trade school, Bach was the school to be, because you had cosmetology, you had, a food service, you had welding. And one of my best friends, because there's only 4 of us, Reek, he was at Bach already. He was a year ahead of me. DJ went to Southern because, he was just, he was going to school, but, he was hustling. And we all, 9th and 10th grade, 9th grade, we were excited about going to school, because that was the typical thing to do. But we were still, wanted to be hanging out in the streets in the neighborhoods, But in the 9th grade, we wasn't at that point where school was out of the picture, or we didn't want to do it because it was still new to us. But as going into 9th grade, I had a hell of an imagination of what school was going to be. I thought I was going to go to school. It was going to be like, watching the Cosby Show or watching one of the TV sitcoms. I was going to get to school. I was going to be walking the hallways with fly clothes on, playing sports. The girls was going to be on me. I was going to be the one, and class was going to flow. It wasn't like that for me, and it wasn't like that for most of us. My first year at Bach was a getting used to, a learning experience, because I wasn't really a school type person anyway. Getting through middle school was hard enough when you wanted to be outside with your friends all day and all night. So Rick being at Bach was a plus, so we'll get there. The first year was cool. It was sweet, but it wasn't what I thought thought it was going to be. I had to work, because I had, at that time I had a brother, a little brother, he was little, 2 little brothers, and Mom Dukes was doing what she could, but it wasn't getting it done. So I wanted to have the Jordans. I wanted to wear this. I wanted to wear that. So my first year at Bach, I wasn't the best dresser. I did, it is what it was. None of us was. We were not stylish superstars in school. So the first year, everything, it was slow. I wasn't the ladies' man I thought I was going to be. Neither one of us, but the thing that we had was the brotherhood we had for each other. So, we made it work. Going into 10th grade, when things got a little different for me. At that point, I was far gone. I was out in the streets, I was never home. I was always at DJ crib. We were going downtown. We were going to parties. House parties. I was staying out late, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Mom sometimes didn't even come home. Mom was working so much she didn't even notice I wasn't there. So we were hanging with each other. We were going out to set the third, and DJ got real deep in the streets. We used to fight a lot up at the schools and stuff like that, but deep in the streets, everybody was getting into the females, and it was like you got to dress to impress to get the females. You got to be getting some kind of money, because the dudes above you was getting that paper, and only the girls were hanging out with them. So at some point, heading into 10th grade, 11th grade, school became number 5 on the list of the things that I wanted to do that we didn't want to do that. So at some point, we would get to school about 12 midnight. Excuse me, not 12 midnight, 12 in the afternoon sometimes, because we would be up all night talking or just doing. At that time, I was dealing with a girl in another projects. At task, I used to be out there 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Reek and DJ, they started having kids, so they had to do what they had to do. You know what I'm saying? And we would get to school at 12 noon and sometimes wouldn't go to school at all. Report cards would come in. They would give us the report cards. Our parents wasn't seeing the report card. We think I was taking those report cards home to get in trouble. And at that point I was far gone. And at that point, going into 11th grade, I decided, you know what? I stopped going to school. I mean, we getting kicked out of, but we definitely got kicked out of Bach because Rick went through something over, a few things I'm not going to get into deeply, but we couldn't go back to school no more at that point, and we had to work. So that's what it was. It was either work. If you wasn't going to school, you was going to work, and if you didn't work, you wasn't going to be stylish, you wasn't going to have anything. Sneakers was going to be run over. You wasn't going to eat. So that's how it was. High school wasn't all the roses I thought it was going to be. And for us, it wasn't, because the streets is all we had at that time. We only had each other at that time. And school became less of a priority for us than getting money and being seen. And that became the most important things for us at that time. Going to the mall, getting girls, trying to be, tough guys and trying to be amongst the crowd. That was our thing at that time. Sometimes, thinking about it, I don't know if I would have changed how things happened, because it made me and my homeboys the men that we became and that we are. But I would tell any young person that's thinking of doing something other than finishing high school, I would tell them go ahead and finish it. But for me, a view from my window, my years in high school wasn't like the TV shows I watched. It was more real than I thought. I grew up too fast.